Okay, thanks very much, Tal, and thanks for this great opportunity and chance, I guess, to speak and to meet some of you entrepreneurs and startups, I guess, from a different part of the world. So I'm personally excited about it, and I wish you, first of all, good luck with this short sort of program that you have here from the embassy. So it's exciting. Also, on a personal level, I'm a Slovak citizen, so I never been to Slovakia yet. Planning on visiting soon, maybe my mother's 70th to do some sort of roots exploration, I guess. So it's exciting to know that some of you guys are from Slovakia. So let's kick it off. We have about an hour and a bit, an hour and 20 minutes left, and the overall agenda would be that I'll do I'm planning on running probably like 30 minutes or so of a sort of a talk or a lecture with slides. And then basically, we will do some sort of a exercise. I mean, you guys will do an exercise. It's basically sort of a tool that I think you might have got the link already by now through Tal. It's a tool that I'm still working and evolving, trying to put together a lot of my personal experience as an entrepreneur and as a sort of mentor advisor working with many startups throughout the last decade in various forms, both individual entrepreneurs and startups at various stages, and trying to look at a way of qualifying visually where a startup is at right now, what are they planning on doing in the next sort of 3 months, and trying to help them focus on a few things. And some of the key building blocks, at least that I see, getting to a point of what it's called a product market fit, which I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with from Googling and doing all the things that you guys are doing. So it's exciting, and let's get into it. And feel free to, if there's any specific questions along the way, feel free to jump in. But the main bulk of the sort of exercise will be in the second part, and then we will have a discussion part sort of in the last sort of 20 or 30 minutes, where we would I basically want you guys to come on and basically discuss your challenges and moving from one place to another in this sort of framework that I'll show you later on. So I hope you get value out of this, and I'm sure it's going to be exciting. So good luck to all of us. And it's exciting for me to kick off this program as well. So I'm happy about it. So I'll share my screen and then we'll get going. So from concept to launch, that's the agenda for today. So I'll tell you a little bit about me first of all, just to give you a bit of background. So as you can pick from my accent, I was born in Israel, but I lived overseas quite a bit. I'll save you the guessing game, but I mean, some of you might have guessed it's sort of in the I guess Asia Pacific region. So I'm half Kiwi, and I lived in New Zealand for 7 years, sort of at the bottom of the world. Depends on where you stand. I mean, they see them as the center of the world, but everybody sees it differently. So my background is varied. I started my career off as a developer, working for startups in around the year 2000, around sort of the big bubble. And then basically moved up the ranks sort of thing through sort of systems analysis, solution architecture, project management, product management. And here on the slide, we can see some of the product management stuff I've done in the last sort of 5 to 6 years, working for a few startups in Israel in the video space. Some of them are quite successful today, and some of them are still quite small. Alongside that, I founded a couple of my own startups in various fields, and currently working on my third, which is not here. It's still sort of under wraps, so to speak. And over the last sort of few years, I've been doing a lot of mentoring at a few organizations on the left, basically in Israel, also sort of accelerators. Doing some lecturing on different topics. And last year, I've also been working with an accelerator managing program, helping sports tech startups basically accelerate, get to market, and raise funds. So that's a little bit about my background, and I'm excited to learn about your backgrounds as well as we move along. So basically today, what I want to do is, as I mentioned just before, I've sort of put together what I look at it as a 9 building block sort of framework that helps a early startup. And again, I know that you guys are different stages of your businesses, so I hope it sort of hits certain tones. But I mean, 9 building blocks that to me are critical to get to a point where there's a product market fit. And we'll talk about that quite a lot in this session. And that is the holy grail from my experience and from my perspective. Getting to that point is tough. And knowing when you get there is also crucial. But it is the sort of the milestone that every startup is basically aiming for. So, and I'll share also a few sort of tips and tricks, I guess, from the Israeli perspective on running startups. And I think there's a lot of similarities from my little experience with speaking and working with startups from Slovakia and that region. So the first building block is obviously needs and problems. I mean, we need to fully understand what are the needs and problems, and where do we start from is basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure some of you know it, and it is a bit academic, but it does illustrate very nicely what are the things that we need to look out for when we go out with an idea and trying to qualify if there is a problem or a need in something we're trying to solve. A lot of the times, entrepreneurs, especially the first timers, they come up with an idea and they think this is it's going to be the best product of the world, and until they actually go out to market, or as Steve Blank mentions, get out of the building, you don't really understand what actually is happening in the potentially target market that you're thinking about. So the whole idea here is not specifically going through this pyramid, but is going out and basically figuring out from people what it is that they need on the various levels, and I'll explain that in just a moment. The other thing that is critical and a lot of times is, I think, missed is the whole concept of what it is B2H. I mean, everybody knows about business to business, B2C and B2B. At the end of the day, when you come to close deals, make sales, you're dealing with people. And it is about finding and figuring out what exactly motivates them and drives them on a personal level in the company, and on a company level. So there's different levels that we need to address and hit to be able to get to a point of validated needs, and so we know how to basically move in that direction. So leading into that is basically the business hierarchy of needs. I mean, it's not really talked about, but at the end of the day as well, when we're trying to sell, and I'm referring to businesses more from a B2B perspective, but a lot of the times, even the C's are representing businesses to some extent, if it's self-employed or others. But it is, I think this is from my experience, a lot of the times startups look at the B2B model as a more sustainable and profitable model in the long run. And it is true. I mean, it has been proven that a B2B model is more effective. So this is an example of looking at what does a business think about, and when we speak to people behind businesses, so what are they actually needing on a basic level? I mean, a lot of the times there will be talks about, okay, I need to make more money. I need to reduce my operational costs. I need to improve my efficiency. I need to become better at my customer service, and so on and so forth. So it is critical to understand what are the needs of the business as well as the people behind it. And many times when I speak to entrepreneurs and I work with them, what I always ask them to do is give me a list of the needs that you've qualified and validated with the businesses or the people behind the businesses that you actually want to speak about, or to speak to, I mean. Okay, so it's very critical to do that. And that leads me into what I just said before, but in a more structured way, that when we go out and we first, the bubble is in the wrong place, but I'll just display them all together. So basically, the first thing we need to figure out is the organization needs on the left. So when we go out and we're thinking about a B2B solution, and forgive me, those of you who do B2C, we'll get to that in a moment. Even though B2C many times has a lot of partnerships along the way to get to the Cs. So when you're dealing with the partners, it's the same story. There's got to be a match between the needs of the partner and the needs of what you're trying to achieve in the long run to get to market, basically. So first of all, identifying the organizational needs. And then it's about identifying at least 2 types of needs, which I call them generic and specific. And basically, the generic is looking at it as sort of like a blank slate. And I always ask, entrepreneurs I mentor and work with, go out to the potential target audience and ask them generically what are their needs on the day-to-day life to try and solve a problem. But first of all, understand what drives them on a regular basis. What are the problems? Because most often you'll find that some people are driven by a lot of unrelated problems or needs in their personal lives. And even though they like an idea, it'll be very quickly disqualified as a qualified lead, because you'll figure out that don't have the headspace to actually think about it, or they don't have the willingness to actually spend money on this because other things are bothering them or important to them. So it's critical to understand the more generic view of their needs. And then obviously we need to look at a specific area. So if it is a function, or if it is a sort of a benefit that you're looking to provide, which requires a specific focus on a specific area, then we need to understand what do they think about that area before pushing, to a certain extent, a solution or a product in that space. So individually, what I mentioned here is when someone is working in a business, then they have the generic needs at a business, but also have private needs. So it's really important to understand the whole spectrum of what drives people and what basically motivates people. At the end of the day, it's looking at some sort of a persona. I'm sure some of you have come across this. And from my experience, you don't have to go to this level of detail as we see here, as figuring out the feelings and emotions. I mean, this is, very, very quickly, this is just an example of a wedding service company. And some of the things that come up from a deep interview, which is what I always recommend entrepreneurs do at the beginning, but also throughout the process of developing a product and putting it in the market, is really understanding what drives them and what are the emotions that drive them. So, I mean, one thing that comes out here, which is really nice, is the fact that when someone is looking at planning a wedding, they want a stress-free day. So it's more of a, it's not a numerical sort of requirement or need, but it is critical because everything will go around that. Whatever solution or whatever product you're thinking about selling in that space has to resolve that sort of drive. So some of you know, there's also a book, famous book that was called Crossing the Chasm. Quite an old one, probably even maybe 20 years old now. But it sort of articulates quite nicely the challenge of even progressing from the early stages of, yes, we have an idea, we have a product, we actually get some users, they like it, they play with it, but there's still a big gap between moving on to the masses, sort of a bigger market, than having the small niche early adopters that really like what we do. And that's sort of crossing the chasm, and it's very critical to be aware of what are the triggers or what sort of makes this product or solution move forward or stop. So the one thing that's also important when we're doing all this sort of assessment of needs and problems is figuring out if these problems and needs are only related to a segment of where we're going. I mean, in a sense, I'll give you an example. I mean, my venture now is looking at providing an analytics platform for kindergartens or daycare centers using computer vision and CCTV cameras. So very easily and very quickly, I find those innovators, basically the owners of private institutes or private businesses that have the top-notch cameras and very much into this modern sort of assessment sort of programs. But the vast majority are not these types of people. The vast majority are more old school, conservative individuals. And as far as providing a solution that will get to the masses, we need to find the things or the features that will actually relate not just to the innovators, but also to the wider audience, even though we're going to get the first traction from the innovators. Okay, so it's also key. And just a couple of words on finalizing this sort of building block is personality types. As far as identifying innovators, I'm sure some of you know the 16 personalities website, or it's called the Myers-Briggs types indicator. It's a fun exercise. I recommend everybody goes through it online, so you can basically figure out what sort of personality type you are. It's very important sometimes to figure that out when working in teams. But I mean, out of those characteristics, these two characteristics are the ones that have been proven to be the most relevant as early adopters and innovators. And actually, some research that was done, they actually on sort of a different level, but in a pharmaceutical company, they ran a lot of different projects and checked and measured the personality types while they're executing projects and figuring out what is successful and what is not. And they found actually there's a 95 sort of times 95 increased chances of success when you're working with types of people. So I'm not saying go out and ask the, people that you're speaking with to do a personality test, but out of a conversation and an interview, you should be able to figure out if they're sort of more of a early adopter as an innovator, or are they more conservative and they want proof and they want validation from other customers first, and so on and so forth. Okay, keep that in mind because it changes some of the early days planning dramatically.